We're going to jump right in with a story. This is going to be a story from Caitlin. Caitlin is part of the Know the Truth program. And I first heard Caitlin speak a few weeks ago. Our Young Addicts was hosting an event with Anoka Hennepin Schools, and we brought in some people to tell their stories. And you've all heard the stories before. We've all heard them. But something really jumped out to me about Caitlin's story, and that's why we really encouraged her to come and be part of this. Caitlin didn't fit the stereotype. Caitlin didn't fit the stigma, and I think you'll find out why. But that's really important because the face of addiction has changed. Addiction can happen to anyone. We never think it's going to happen, but it really can. And so Caitlin's going to tell us a little bit about her story and what she's been up to since. Come on up, Caitlin.
Perfect. I'm just going to jump right in. I grew up in the Blaine area, just in the suburbs, not too far from here, and I had a really good home life growing up. My parents were divorced, and so I lived with my dad and my older sister. And growing up, my dad was very supportive, really loving. He was always around. And growing up, I was always a good kid. I was always someone who did well in school. I was a dancer. I did studio dance as soon as I could walk. And when I was in 7th grade, I started on the dance team in my middle school, and then by high school, I was on the dance team. I was captain of the dance team my junior and senior year, and I was an honor student. I took advanced placement classes for college credit. I took classes at the U of M. Throughout high school, I graduated high school with a 3.9 GPA. I was a student who, in high school, no one worried about me. My parents didn't worry about me. Teachers didn't worry about me, counselors didn't worry about me. I never had a discussion with a school resource officer. But I was struggling in ways that no one really was aware of. I struggled throughout high school throughout my childhood, but into high school with self-esteem issues and body image issues. And so in high school, I struggled with an eating disorder that was a secret from everybody. And I also started to struggle with substance use. And my first experience with substance was when I was 15 and my wisdom teeth were removed and I was prescribed Vicodin. And I took it as prescribed for a while, but I liked how it felt, and so sometimes I took more than I was prescribed. And it never occurred to my dad to be the one to administer the meds or to be the one to hold the bottle or to ask for the Vicodin back when I was healed up from my surgery. And so that was my first experience with it, but once those pills were gone, they were gone, and I didn't have access to them. And so the thing that I did have access to in high school was alcohol. And so when I was 15, I was introduced to alcohol through friends that I had. And most of us were dancers, all of us were jocks, we're all good students. And so our parents didn't really question us too often. And so we started to get away with drinking. We were stealing alcohol from our parents, we were getting alcohol from older siblings. And I liked how it felt to be drunk. I liked how it felt to drink. And I found out after I had drank for the first time at a party that if I felt insecure at a party, if I started to become aware of my body image issues while I was at a party, that I could get drunk and I could not think about that stuff. And so throughout high school, I drank most weekends. I was introduced to marijuana a few months after I started drinking for the first time. And I got away with it for a long time because I knew I could tell my dad I was going to be at Sarah's house and I could go to Emily's house, and my parents didn't talk to the other parents, and I knew I was never going to get called into the counselor's office. I wasn't going to have a teacher ask me any kind of questions. And so me and my friends got away with it, I guess until we didn't get away with it. My dad caught me with alcohol and then soon after caught me with a bag of weed my sophomore year of high school. And so that was my first real run-in with any kind of consequences. And my dad didn't mess around, and so he sent me to treatment the summer after my sophomore year of high school. And my parents' attitude about treatment was that I went to treatment for 30 days, came home, and that was the end of the issue, and so we didn't talk about it again. And coming back from treatment, my school was aware, my parents had let my school know, but there wasn't a meeting with counselors, there wasn't a meeting with teachers. The attitude was my grades were good, I was still showing up for dance, and I was still winning state championships for dance, and so the issue was over. I went to treatment one more time in high school because I got caught with weed a second time, and my dad had the same attitude. Like, treatment was to scare me. It wasn't because I had a problem. And so coming back from treatment, I just learned how to be more sneaky. I learned how to be more manipulative. I learned how to hide the fact that I was using from my parents even more. And come graduation, there wasn't a single like teacher or counselor that really thought I was struggling, and my parents thought the issue was over, but I never stopped drinking or smoking weed. I graduated high school, like I said, with 3.9 GPA. I was third in my class. I walked with honors, and I went to college on a full ride academic scholarship. Coming into college, I was still going to parties. I set up my schedule so that I could. I didn't take classes on Friday, so I could party Thursday night through Sunday morning. And I thought that was normal in college. I was like, this is what you do in college. You are a little crazy, a little stupid, and then you grow up and get over it. But at the parties I was at, more friends were going through wisdom teeth removal. One of our friends was in a car accident. And so it wasn't just alcohol and weed showing up. Oxycontin, Vicodin, and Percocets were showing up at the parties I was going to. And at this point, I had a prescription for Xanax, and so we were abusing prescription pills. Again, like, it didn't occur to anyone to, none of our parents asked us for the pills back when we were done. Like, we were in college, but a lot of us lived with parents still, and it never occurred to anyone that we would be abusing these things. And so I started to abuse mostly Oxycontin throughout college, and really quickly, we ran out of pills because you're only prescribed so much. And so when that happened, I started to use heroin. I was 19 when I started heroin for the first time, and that was because heroin is just like Oxycontin, but it's a lot cheaper, and it was a lot easier to find. And so that really just started to escalate my addiction. And for a long time, I knew it was really serious that I was using heroin, but I also felt like I was in control of it. And so I didn't really worry about it. I felt like I could stop anytime. I didn't feel addicted. And so I used heroin. I snorted it for a while. And when that stopped working, I started using needles. And that's when things like all of the stuff from the inside kind of came to light. In my life. 2 months before I was supposed to graduate college, because of my heroin use, I wasn't showing up to classes, wasn't doing what I was supposed to do, and so I was kicked out of college. After I was kicked out of college, I lost my job and didn't really do a whole lot after that except for use heroin. And at that point, people were concerned about me, but at that point, I was living on my own, and there was nothing that anyone could do. And so I was off to the races, and I kind of felt like I was in my bottom, and I knew I needed to stop using. And that's when the overdoses started. By the time I was 21, I overdosed 3 times on a mix of heroin, cocaine, heroin and Xanax, heroin and anything. And I knew it was probably going to kill me, and I honestly didn't care. It wasn't until one night at a party, my best friend Emily and I were using together, and she was a friend from kindergarten. We became best friends in kindergarten, and we're inseparable ever since. We were roommates through college, and we partied together. And that night, she used heroin, and she overdosed. And I realized she was overdosing, and I had been a lifeguard throughout college and throughout high school, and so I started to perform CPR, called the police, but by the time the police got there, she had already died. And that was really this moment where I realized, like, we were all gonna die if we didn't get sober. And so that was when the first time I became willing to ask for help. And so I called my dad, and I got into recovery. I got into 12-step groups, and it was a journey. It took me 2 years to get my first year of sobriety. But now I've been sober for almost 5 years. And I have a full-time job now. Like, life looks normal for me. It looks really good for me. But when I look back, like, there was so many warning signs, and there were so many things that could have been done, but people didn't know what to do. My parents didn't know what to do. No one knew after I got out of treatment that there needed to be some follow-up, maybe at school. It wasn't just a home issue, it was a school issue. But because my grades weren't suffering and I wasn't skipping classes, no one at school thought it was a school issue. And because I was showing up for curfew, my dad didn't think it was his problem. And because there's no, like, run-ins with the law early on, the police were never involved. In reality, like, I needed community support from the beginning, but I wasn't gonna ask for help. I needed someone to tell me that I needed help, to ask me if I was okay. But because I was a good student and a good kid, it never occurred to me that I wouldn't be doing okay. So yeah, I guess that's all I've got for you guys.
Thank you, Caitlin, for that heartfelt story. I think you know why I wanted her to be one of our speakers. I'm now going to call our panelists up onto stage, and we will jump in and start talking about identifying needs. 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 All right, similar to panel number one, we are going to give each of the panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves and answer a question. Then we're going to move into some set questions, and then we'll begin to take questions from the audience via text. So long before a young person tries drugs or alcohol, and certainly before this use has the potential to manifest as addiction, there are a variety of signs and symptoms, situations and scenarios that we need to recognize. To Caitlin's point, sometimes we just need to ask, what's going on? Are you okay? So this panel is going to consider some of the physical, mental, emotional, societal, and other facets that are leading to substance use. I'm going to give each of our panelists a chance to introduce yourselves, and if you would answer this question, what is the primary benefit to properly identifying needs in youth? What's the primary benefit of properly identifying needs early on in youth?
My name is Jason Reed. I'm a licensed psychologist and clinical lead for the co-occurring program at Melrose Center, which is an eating disorder treatment center. I work with the patients there that also struggle with addiction. And I think probably what I see as the main benefit of identifying all of the needs of the individual early on is really to make sure they get the most comprehensive and integrated care that they're going to need if they do end up falling into a substance use problem. Obviously, you know, prevention is very important, and you'd love to prevent young people from going down this road, but it's inevitable that some people will end up with these problems. And what I see is a lot of individuals that have had multiple addiction treatments, sometimes into the 30s. And what I notice is there's a lot left that is not healed. I was really glad to see that we were going to possibly talk about the ACEs studies and the impact trauma has in this area. You know, at our center, the impact eating disorders, untreated eating disorders have. So I think, you know, I was trained in a biopsychosocial model, so looking at this not just as a brain disease, but looking at the full, all of the different factors that can contribute to addiction, identifying all the needs up front can help someone get the right treatment and hopefully do it the right way. A lot of times people, once they start getting into the treatment, multiple treatments, they enter this cycle of shame. And what happens is people start to question whether this person is motivated, quote unquote. And I think motivation is very much misunderstood with this problem. Motivation is not a fixed trait. It's a fluid state that actually can change and be enhanced within relationships. And I see that every day at Melrose. And, you know, I guess lastly, I just want to say that, you know, in my experience, the most powerful interventions for addiction are love and hope. And we package those in different ways from a professional standpoint, but that's really, I think, how people end up healing.
Hi, so I'm PJ Agarwala. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I'm the senior medical director for child psychiatry at M Health, which is the new name for the U of M and Fairview Health Systems. So I went into child psychiatry because I really feel strongly that if we can intervene with kids and adolescents, then we can really change the trajectory. So treating people early, getting people help early will prevent hopefully some of these significant illnesses from affecting school, affecting social development, and prolonging or worsening these symptoms into adulthood. And so I really think if we can identify these needs early, we can hopefully get people the treatment they need as early as possible. And when we look at brain development, kids' brains are developing till the age of 25. And that means all their pathways are developing. And when people use drugs at an early age, all their brain circuits are changed. And the adolescent brain is so much more sensitive to these things than adults will be because their brain is still developing. And so when I look at it and I say, if I can prevent them from using drugs in the first place, their brains are going to develop better. They're going to be less vulnerable to mental health disorders, less vulnerable to cognitive disorders and making bad choices. And once you start using, you have 2 weeks before the opiates have really changed your brain chemistry. 2 weeks. That's pretty amazing.
My name is Laura Zabinski, and I have the privilege of working on staff with Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge, but I'm the program manager of their prevention program, Know the Truth, which is the substance abuse prevention program that goes out into the high schools and middle schools across the state of Minnesota. And through our time going and speaking into the schools, we bring in young individuals that have struggled with addiction firsthand to share their stories with the students and to play out the full reel with the students. Oftentimes, students, as you talked about in brain development, they're only in this place that this is going to make me happy now, but they don't necessarily see where it's going to play out. And the reason why I got involved in this job was, well, I had the criteria. I struggled with addiction. I used drugs and alcohol, and I'm in recovery now. And so I really want to give a voice to those students and give them an opportunity to be heard, because I didn't necessarily I never really felt like my needs were identified in school, similar to what Caitlin had shared as well. And so one of the keys and benefits of being able to identify the needs on the front end, and I think I'm only echoing what's already been said, is we're able to give them the treatment that they need. This can't be just a one-faceted way of getting kids help. It has to be a multifaceted, because we're all different and we all experience things differently. And so I think that that's really important. And we see that oftentimes with the kids that we work with. So often after we share and we open up about what we've gone through and what we're struggling through, we'll have students come up and ask, tell me more about that. Why did you go through that? And my next question for them is always, why do you ask? Because there's usually more behind the story, and they aren't just freely going to give it to you. They want you to ask. And so oftentimes then you're able to paint the picture of what's really going on. So if you do see the back end of my grades are slipping, I'm skipping school, well, you'll be able to see the front end as well if we are able to identify those needs on the front end. Thank you.
Do we get her extra minute to share? My name is Mike Mayer. I am a judge in the 1st Judicial District. I'm chambered in Dakota, and I spend a lot of time in juvenile court. I've been involved in juvenile stuff at the state and national level forever. I was a juvenile public defender for a long time. I have been either the chair or vice chair of the Governor's Juvenile Justice Advisory Committee in Minnesota since 1994. And I serve on the board of directors for the Coalition for Juvenile Justice in Washington, D.C. So don't get me going on money. Somebody said money. I'll premise it by saying that in 2002, Minnesota's allocation from the federal government for juvenile justice prevention and intervention programs was $6.3 million. Last year, the feds gave us $634,000 to distribute statewide to juvenile prevention and intervention programs. Our hands are being tied. Senator Klobuchar, I meet with her 3 or 4 times a year. She's a champion. Franklin's a champion. But our kids have become partisan issues, and we all need to do something to stop that from happening. It took me a while on the juvenile bench to come to the understanding that very few kids are born bad. There are some. There are some that we are going to have an exceptionally difficult time changing or helping. Most kids, something has caused them to act the way they're acting. They've experienced some kind of trauma. I try very hard to have a trauma-informed approach to what I'm doing on the bench. And kid after kid will say, nobody's ever asked me that, because I don't ask them why they're drinking. I don't ask them why they're doing this. I ask them what happened to them that's causing them to engage in this behavior. And then they open up, then they're willing to share with you. So I think the key thing to learning early on is what is that traumatic event, what happened to them, and you can take an entirely different approach as to how you're going to help them. You don't yell at them, and it's going to sound terrible, but you hug them. And it might be a verbal hug, and it just may be less of a yell, but it's something so that somebody understands, or they understand that somebody gets what they're going through. I mean, I'm off the scales on ACEs, right? So I can look at them and understand exactly where they've been, and I think they appreciate that.
Good morning. I'm Sheriff Bill Hutton of Washington County. What's different about this panel when you look at it, right? I stand out a little bit different than most of the folks here.
You're taller.
Maybe besides the judge here. So I've had several conversations with folks as to why I am on a panel. Well, I come with a little bit of a unique perspective. I was started off within the youth services. I started off as a youth worker back in 1979. Yes, I was 12 years old. And then I began as a part-time police officer in the city of Oakdale, and then went full-time in 1986. So I have 33 plus years as a law enforcement officer. And entirely throughout my career, I stayed connected with the youth service bureaus. Matter of fact, again, I started in {79} as an employee in the Youth Service Bureau. Then I became the executive director of a Youth Service Bureau, and then I am the past president of the Stillwater Youth Service Bureau, which services most of Washington County. So I've always been involved somehow in delivering some type of youth services. I was a juvenile officer. I was a school resource officer. I came from as I said, Oakdale at the time, which was a smaller police department, which has grown over many years. So I've always been connected. I've always been the one within the agency where someone has gone to and says, what are we going to do about this when it comes to juvenile needs? We also try to provide as much programming as we can. And hopefully what people are seeing in law enforcement nowadays over the last just several years, we are coming to having a different perspective about addiction. We are recognizing that we just cannot and will not arrest our way out of this problem. Just on my way over here today, as I was on the phone and I hung up the phone, I'm listening to the radio, the police radio, and there were several calls involving young folks. We had one at Tartan High School that they were running from the police. I think it was alcohol related. We had another in Washington County where we were in the midst of transporting a young person for a psych hold. And there was another one cooking, bad term, but another one happening in Cottage Grove. So we as law enforcement officers are dealing with this day in and day out multiple times during each and every day. We are dealing with these issues, and we are trying to recognize and looking at these issues involving juvenile addiction or addiction period differently. We're not throwing everybody in jail as what had happened in the past. We're trying to recognize and provide different levels of service. And the greatest thing that we are dealing with is the stigma. That people are not calling, and stigma, if you will, both ways. Not only law enforcement, but also law enforcement officers having stigma and families having stigma with addiction as well and not making the call.
Thank you very much. And I do have to say, my son had a very brief run-in with Washington County, and you guys were great because you didn't want to haul him in. You actually wanted to talk to us and try to figure out what was going on. And boy, oh boy, after we yelled, And after we hugged, we told you what was going on, and things worked out pretty well. So we've got some diversity up here in terms of perspective. And my first question for our panel is, what are some of the primary signs and symptoms that we need to recognize? Maybe the things that aren't obvious to us. These could be part of ACEs. These could be more, boredom, curiosity. What are some of the things that we need to be looking for that maybe aren't on the surface?
From a street perspective, everybody looking at one another up here as what's going on.
You're holding the microphone.
Yeah.
It's like hot potato.
I handed it off to the judge earlier, and he says, "You're just funning me, aren't you, here? I'm not supposed to have this." From the street perspective, we're seeing it all. I think Caitlin's story was incredible, and I've heard way too many stories over the years and seen too many things over the years. The phone calls, or her family having contact with her when she's been drinking. The finding of marijuana. And don't get me started on that one, but the findings of marijuana, just the behavioral issues, the things that are changing. I think most everybody that's in this room and the panel that I heard prior to us getting up here addressed many of those issues. But as law enforcement officers, we see it from the parties when we're calling parents and we're getting the reply back, oh, it's just alcohol, or it's just marijuana, no big deal, how things are changing. In our society about marijuana, how people are becoming more accepting of it, where we should be, in my opinion, the opposite of it. So there's those signs that we're seeing day in and day out. The phone call maybe that you made to law enforcement, or when we showed up at your house. So we're seeing lots and lots of things on the street that we try to bring to parents' attentions. Please don't consider it, it's just alcohol. Please don't consider it, it's just marijuana. It's their first time. I had a conversation with an individual before I walked up here. He had had multiple contacts with law enforcement for DUI, and he said that law enforcement saved his life as a result. And the reality was, he says, those 4 DUIs are just an impression of the 4,000 times that I drove under the influence. So there's lots of things that we see from a law enforcement perspective.
I think from the court's perspective, we treat it ass backwards. I also see the exact same things. The parents they want to be friends as opposed to parents. So they have no problems hosting the keg parties. It's just weed, Judge. It's legal in California. And, I've looked at some of the same studies that Saul did. I don't know where he went. But it screws up your brain. And if you are in an addictive mode or you're in a trauma-responsive mode, it's definitely a gateway drug. I mean, it simply is. But we treat it ass backwards because it's so common that the court system doesn't give it the attention that it deserves. Very few people understand. By law, a minor consumption ticket is a misdemeanor level offense. By rule of juvenile procedure in law, the first 2 are freebies. It's automatically being given a petty misdemeanor designation, which makes me a complete paper tiger. There's not a darn thing I can do to enforce what I'm ordering that kid to do. If I say no use random testing, nobody's going to go test them. And if they do go test them and they come back positive, there is absolutely nothing I can do about it except yell at them again. So at least in Dakota County, you got to be on number 3 before I can even put you on probation to a probation officer. I'm putting the first 2 times through on probation to me. I promise you that's a waste of time. You got to be on number 3 before you can get a probation officer. And it's still been designated a petty misdemeanor offense. So it's still toothless, but at least I can get a chemical dependency evaluation ordered and have something take place or a seed planted in the parent's head that this isn't just something small. And I'm not a big believer in coincidence. I don't believe that this kid who's here on number 3 or number 4 or number 5, holy shit, the only 5 times he's had a beer, he's managed to encounter law enforcement. Yeah, you are Washington County. That's very possible. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. But if you're in court on number 3, if you've been busted 3 times, you're drinking all the time. Nobody's that unfortunate. So we need to reassess what we're treating as serious, because I think if we can intervene there, we may have a lot more success on the other end. Oh, you already have one.
I'm ready.
All right.
I think on the front end of sides, and some things that we can be looking for and things that we can identify with some of these students or young people, you've got your basics. You know, they're missing class, failing school. I think friend groups play a huge role. Oftentimes we talk about this with the students as well, like the friends you hang out with, you tend to be like. And if you sit in a barbershop long enough, you're eventually going to get a haircut. If you're around it enough, like, it's a possibility. That possibility is always going to be there, and you never know whether it's a bad day, a good day, you're just curious. I think curiosity plays a role as well. If you have a student that's really fascinated with it, even if they're not quite at that stage where they're using, fascination really plays a role. But the face of addiction has changed quite a bit as well. And so you've got straight A students that are using prescription pills to help study during finals. You've got all-star athletes that just had an injury that are popping a couple extra painkillers to be able to get through the next game, make sure that they can still perform at their best. And so I think really looking at the friend group, but also seeing those like small things that really add up over time with those students as well.
So I think what I see a lot in the patients is this. When you talk to them about what they were like at 4 or 5 years old, they never learned how to tolerate being distressed in any way. So I'll give you an example. When the kid's an infant and crying, what do the parents do? Is their first instinct to rush in and save them? Is it to let the kid learn how to self-soothe and go to bed? And that's a really small example. But so then they're 4 or 5, they stub their toe. Do the parents give them Tylenol? Do they kind of say, oh my God, that sucks, like let's, give you a hug, you're fine, let's kind of move on? Do they, make a big deal about it, take them to the ER? Like, how is this kid learning to self-soothe themselves and to tolerate a feeling that doesn't feel good, which is pain, right? And as kids get older, there's a lot more emotional pain that starts developing. They want to be cool, they want to be liked, they want to be smart, they want to be successful. Kids also really pick up on how their parents cope with distress and how their friends cope with distress. So if the parents have a really lax attitude towards drinking, if the parents are using drugs, that's already kind of a setup for failure in some ways. If the parent's like, oh, I had a hard day, I'm going to have a glass of wine, what message is that kid getting from day one, right? You should have a glass of wine to tolerate distress. You should pop a pill to tolerate distress. And this is the same message that they're going to start getting from their friend group as they're getting into middle school and high school years. And substance abuse is starting way earlier. I always thought kids didn't start using till college. No, kids are using in middle school. We have 12-year-olds admitted for substance use. That's so disturbing to me. And I think it's going back to this, it's much easier to take a pill or put your kid in front of the TV than to deal with whatever's going on with them. And I think we really have to look at that piece. So kids start using, they kind of learn that distress is hard, and then social media comes into it, right? And what does social media say? Everybody posts the best image of themselves, having fun, sometimes drinking, my life is so amazing. And so you have a kid who is already struggling with wanting to be cool and seeing everybody else is cool, everybody else is having a great life. Why am I not having that great life all the time as everybody else seems to be having? And then self-esteem issues start popping into this, right? So they already can't cope, they have poor self-esteem, they don't know what to do to help themselves feel better. And then they get their wisdom teeth taken out, right? And they're given 30 days of Vicodin with 2 refills. Who had pain for 30 days after their wisdom teeth were pulled? Maybe a day, 2 days? I certainly didn't need 3 months of Vicodin for that. And luckily my mom was like, no, you're not even getting that. We're not filling that prescription. But see how these little things are starting to add up and set this kid up for an addiction. It's all these little things that we have to look at and how we're teaching kids to manage distress. And a lot of that does have to come from the parents and from the schools, because those are the two settings that these kids are learning how to manage themselves and how to become grown-ups.
Do you want to weigh in on that one, Jason?
Real quickly, I'll just say, this is there's so many things you have to look for. I think co-occurring disorders, where there's a co-occurring mental health condition are really the norm now, not the exception. And identifying how mental health is playing into this is really important early on. And I guess one of the things I look for that maybe you wouldn't see in a standard assessment is what scares me the most with a young person is if this substance use is working for them, if they're using it to cope, and if there aren't other, whether it's distress tolerance skills or other opportunities in their environment for other ways of feeling good, of being feeling reinforced, then I think that's a huge risk factor, because we only give up things when we feel like there's an alternative that's going to be better. And I see a lot of individuals where this, in a lot of ways, the substance abuse is a goal-directed behavior, and it's, believe it or not, it's kind of their best option in the situation.
Good responses. So let's shift for just a minute and let's look at what can we learn from kids that are making healthy and positive choices? What are some of the behaviors there, and are there some learnings that we can take away from that when we look at kids at risk for substance use?
Generally speaking, I don't run into them.
They're not coming to your office?
They're not coming to court, yeah. But I think there would be a tremendous amount of sense in figuring out what their coping skills are, and having sort of teen mentor programs taking place in the schools, where some of the kids who are struggling with issues and don't have those coping skills could go and talk to somebody who does have those coping skills, but not frequent flyers in my system.
When we look
I
at,
think it might be best.
when we look at how people learn, the best way people learn is positive reinforcement. You can yell at somebody and tell them they're doing something wrong a million times, but if you catch them when they're doing something good and reinforce that, you're going to get way more bang for your buck. And so a lot of I think about like the nurses at work, right? I want them to document really well. And so instead of complaining when they're not documenting well, I just send them like, thank you for your awesome documentation emails, and the improvement in the documentation has gone way up. And I think it's the same thing with kids. And I tell the staff this all the time on the inpatient unit, let's not yell at this kid. Let's just figure out when he's doing what he's supposed to be doing, and like give him so much praise and attention and rewards that he's going to want to keep doing that, because that's how he's going to get what he needs from us. And I think it's the same with parents and with difficult kids. It gets really easy to get caught up in a cycle of this kid's bad, this kid is just screwing up. But if we spend the time reinforcing whatever that kid does well, they're going to want your attention for that stuff much more.
The audience likes that.
I would say that did you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay. I think figuring out what someone finds reinforcing, what environmental factors are playing into things. Can you say the question one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, what are some things that we can learn from the kids that are making healthy choices?
Yeah, so when I saw this question, I was a little bit stumped, because I don't know that there's a lot of research out there. The research really focuses on, when things go wrong, and maybe it's just where I gravitate towards as well, but I think it would be really interesting to have more information on, what things look like when they're going right.
Good point.
I think it's really easy to focus on those that aren't doing well, and it's really easy to focus on those who are acting out. I had one individual sum it up pretty quickly. I would get in trouble because people would pay attention to me. I didn't get that attention at home. And so for those individuals that are doing well in school, and for those individuals that are doing positive things, I think it's really good to evaluate, like, what are they interested in? You know, what are they keeping their focuses on? What are they passionate about? Like, are they involved with after-school activities? Do they have a mentor? Do they have a teacher that they connect with better than another? Because I feel like those individuals that are acting out need those things, and they need help discovering those things in their lives in order to replace some of those negative habits that they have, and they need the attention saying, hey, you can do this. Because oftentimes when they are acting out and when they aren't doing well, it's because they want something. It's not just because they want to be a rebellious student.
You make a good point, and I'm going to bring up siblings here. When there are siblings in the family and a kid is having challenges, all of a sudden all of our focus is on the kid with the challenge, and so we sometimes start to ignore or not notice what's going on in the kids' lives. We certainly saw that in my family. Something else that tends to happen a lot, and not just with youth, but there is stigma attached to anything that has to do with substance use or mental health. What are some of the myths that exist around substance use, and how can we overcome those?
I think a big myth is that it's just kids who are poor, racially diverse, and that have a single-parent household. I mean, I think Caitlin's story really demonstrates it's everybody. Like, we really have to look at everybody. And just to back up a little bit, I mean, I think your point is actually really valid. It's not just the kids in trouble that we have to look at, but it's the kids like Caitlin who have a great GPA and are on the dance team and have all these things, that you still have to give them that positive reinforcement and spend the time with them to show them that what they're doing is awesome. You know what I mean? Sorry, I forgot the question though.
No, we're talking overcoming, what are the myths and
Yeah.
overcoming those myths?
So I think it's everybody. We really have to pay attention to all ages. Young kids, we have to, it's not just teenagers, it's not just college kids, it's young kids of good families that are doing well in school. These are still the kids that are at risk, and it's a huge problem that we're forgetting.
I always say it's the not my kid is the kid that we have to worry about most. That was certainly our case. Not my kid was the kid we had to worry about most. Other myths, barriers.
They will grow out of it. That is a huge myth that we did, that they're just young folks and it's just passing the time. And the biggest myth is everybody's doing it, right? And we all know that. Not everybody is doing it. And statistics show that not everybody is doing it. That is the biggest myth that we deal with. And we're talking about substance abuse and pills, and I know we're dealing with youth, but the number that is growing greatest for us for overdose deaths is between 40 and 60 years old. So people are not growing out of it.
That's why we're focused on youth. We got to stop it before it manifests later on.
I think there's another big myth that cannabis is not dangerous.
Right.
It's true.
I'm going to cheer on that one.
I literally have 3 patients on the inpatient unit right now that have marijuana-induced psychosis. And it is terrifying. I really want to videotape these kids and go to high schools and just show them what marijuana can do. It is not pleasant. It takes a really long time to get better. And it's scary.
True. I'm really going to date myself, but there was a short clip that used to get shown in theaters, black and white, when I was a kid, and yet they had talk. There was, but it was called Reefer Madness. Did anybody see Reefer Madness? Right? And you sat there laughing at it, but my God, it's true. And this whole Colorado made it legal, and I have a dear friend who's very high up in the chemical dependency counseling chain in the state of Colorado, and she says it's a disaster. There are kids driving around stoned. They are going right into other drugs from that. The state crime lab can't conceivably keep up with the blood and urine tests that are being required to be done for all the driving under the influence charges. And then people, I was just out in Washington, D.C. doing some lobbying and for a conference, and you can smoke it there. You can't sell it, and you can't buy it there. Now, what kind of a legal fiction? What kind of a legal fiction is that? I mean, people are just not thinking. Our leaders are not thinking. They're not understanding that it really can lead to much more serious problems. So yeah, weed is bad stuff.
One challenge we also have is we have more questions than we have time for. So I'm going to transition to Adam, but let's give our panel a very big round of applause. We started to hear some different responses to the questions, and we started to hear some questions that I know I haven't heard asked, so I really applaud that. We will try to tweet some of those questions out, so if you want to engage on social media and your question didn't get answered, maybe we can get some of the audience to chime in. Thank you.